Live. Thank God. Last class, here you are, sir. We jumped into the second Hakdama. The Hakdama is a preface. We're going to never get to the bottom of this Shofar business. We have the first preface was the concept of the intermediary, which we covered at great length. The second preface was the beginning of a conversation about the yichud of Abba ve'Uma, the unification of the father and the mother, which primarily what we said about that is that inside of the deep recesses of the mind, subconscious mind, which we said like we're all attached in some way to this collective consciousness of man, which is where your ideas actually come from, right? So in other words, when an idea pops into your head, it's like a find, right? That was given to you from a source. You can almost feel the source in a certain sense that you didn't originate this; it came from somewhere, and it did. It came from a place called the koach hamaskil. So the ideas themselves is called the seichel, the intellect, but the koach hamaskil, the power to create intellect, is what makes these ideas come up in your mind. It's sort of like the inner recesses of the mind. We said it comes from this lachluchis, this moistness of the brain, and so forth. Some kind of a situation there. Anyway, we said that this is obviously in a completely incomparable level than the actual ideas that you have in your head, right? Because when they're in their source, they're in a much higher level, frequency, vibration, what have you. And to the point that it's considered almost like yesh me'ayin, like because now you have like a substantive idea in your head, whereas before it was involved and included inside of this rarefied place. We said there's also another level of productivity from the koach hamaskil, and that is what remembers the second concept.
So see the drop.
Exactly, that it can give over sort of a spiritual revelation from itself, which is an idea, or it can give over what will eventually manifest as a physical representation of itself, which starts as like a spiritual drop, which takes up some kind of space. It's not like an idea. Some type of a again rarefied, refined level of substance comes out of it. It then becomes physicalized even further inside of the spinal cord until it becomes seed, right, in which you have babies with. So he said this also is ultimately coming from the koach hamaskil, but we said there's a very different level of these two types of drops that come out of the koach hamaskil. One is primarily producing spirituality, which is an idea in your head. The other one eventually produces physicality from you, which actually can reproduce you. And we said that even though, in a sense, one would think that spirituality is sort of higher than physicality, and in many ways it is, right? There's more revelation, there's more, so to speak, taste. You know, it's more understandable. It shows you more, but at the end of the day, there's something embedded in the core of physicality, which is actually higher than spirituality itself. Meaning it accesses a deeper essence of the koach hamaskil, to the point of the actual koach hamaskil itself. Its essence can be supplement, can be deposited inside of the physical part. And we said a very handy analogy for this was basically like an apple seed, right? And when you have the apple, it has these seeds, which on the outset, these seeds look much lower and like less qualitative than the actual juicy part of the apple, right? Because they're hard, they have no taste. They're basically kind of like just stuck in there. What are they doing in there? You want to have an apple, right? But the reality is that inside of those seeds, you have an entirely new apple and even a new pardes, right? A new orchard. Whereas the good part of the apple, the part you want to eat, it's basically kind of useless in terms of the future, right? You can eat it; it gives you something, some taste, right? And it's fancy and looks good, but it doesn't have. It has like a mere expression of the essence, but it doesn't bear the entirety of the essence to the point that it can actually reproduce itself. Right, so this is exactly what's going on with these two levels from the deep recesses of the brain. One of them, they're both representations, they're both expressions of that deep recess. One comes out though like an apple, like a fluffy part of the apple, which is that it shows you taste. It's very high level. It's spiritually speaking, that's like a revelation of God where you can dig your teeth into it and understand God, and he shows you himself, which spiritually speaking is very high. Whereas the other one, he doesn't really show you much about himself. It contracts itself into something condensed, which has no revelation, no taste. But on the other hand, that lower one ultimately has the core and the essence of the Koach HaMaskil embedded into it to the point that it can reproduce itself, which means that obviously in order to reproduce something which is compared to the original, it must have all the power and of the essence itself. Remember that? That was yesterday's class, or how many days ago that was. Okay, so moving right along, we're going to take from page 718, which should be the new copy I just gave you now. Top of the page. V'zeu ha'hefresh bein toldos hanashamas letoldos hamalachim. What we just described is the difference between the offspring of souls, and Hashem creating souls versus him creating angels. The shoresh hatolda shalom alachim is zivug neshikin da ab ve'ima. Because David, we're going to get finally our answer. What does actually mean a unification of Abba and Ima? What is Abba and Ima? We said Chochma and Bina. So the root of the so to speak offspring of souls. In other words, where are souls born from? They come from a unification of Abba and Ima in the form of a kiss. Right? So when men come together face to face, there's basically two parts of them that touch, right? Their private parts and their mouth, right? So this is all metaphoric. Like why we even like get together with women like that is because ultimately we are like a demonstration of how Hashem is uniting with his own self in the supernal spheros, right? And so it's not just like, oh, you happen to be created with 5 fingers, 2 ears, hair. No, it's all we are a manifestation of the higher powers of Hashem, and therefore there's actually, when you unite with someone, there's 2 points of unification. One is called the kiss, right? And this is where angels come from. When Hashem kisses, he makes angels. Shuizdabkus rucha berucha, chabad bechabad, which is the idea that he's basically, he's clinging one spirit to another spirit. In other words, all the spheros basically pass through the mouth in a sense, and in a certain sense, he like reproduces himself to a certain degree. Which means there's a shine from Chochma to Bina, me'ayin liyesh, right? From nothing to something, from the source of the Chochma of Atzilus. So, in other words, just like we said before, when Chochma and Bina unite, in order for Chochma to go into Bina, in order for something to come out and sort of and for the revelation to all of a sudden become a yesh, it doesn't actually come from Chochma itself, as we've been saying before. It comes from the Koach HaMaskil, right? David, stay with us, baby. It comes from the Koach HaMaskil, which means that the source of Chochma is triggered to all of a sudden, shoot out something from itself, which then will be manifest in what we would call before an idea. Here he's now saying it's kind of like an angel. That same idea we were talking before inside of ourselves is like an angel, right? Which it comes suddenly something from nothing, right? The angelic world is like creation. So it's like all of a sudden it's like an idea was dropped in your head, which came out of nowhere. So to the angels, sort of like come out of nowhere, what they really are is an expression of the Koach HaMaskil, expressing itself from going through Chochma and manifesting as a thing in Bina, and it comes out as an angel. But the source of the souls, they come from the other point of unification on the man and woman, right? From the private parts. This is a physical unification, and we say therefore it's not from Chabad to Chabad. It's not like a mental thing from the head. It's from Zun, which is Za and Nukva, which is the lower parts of the person. That's where the unification happens. Ooh, which seems like, I got it, man. We can give this to Lady. Which seems like, obviously, the transmission has gone down. Like we were saying before, there's a Yerida, there's a descent. Obviously, Chabad is higher than the Zun, than the lower spheros. Shenimshach b'chinas mayin decharim deza b'chinas penimius hamochin da'aba. Right? And what he says here is some Kabbalistic language that the masculine waters, which is basically the semen, right, of Za, is what is being transferred there, not a kiss, right? And it's rather the masculine waters, as they're politely called, and they come from the panemius of the mochin of Abba. So in other words, before we were saying that the father's mind went into the mother's mind in a state of Chabad, like a kiss, but that was from the external aspect of the Koach HaMaskil. Here, when it's actually, even though it's representing itself as a lower form, like a seed, it actually comes from and sourced from the deeper, higher part of the Koach HaMaskil. And that's like giving over its absolute essence. The way that the essence actually comes out is not with light and revelation. It's not like a mental thing where it's like a kiss, where you're expressing. The idea of a kiss is that it's the head is where all the thoughts and like the good reason and the taste is, right? That's what's transferred. Like the fruit, the fluffy part of the fruit, it's like all the revelation, so to speak, of the taste and the size and the shape, which is nice, but the essence is not contained in there. When you want the essence of the Koach HaMaskil to come out, it doesn't come out looking all fancy, because the essence is impossible really to describe. It's something essential. So it comes out as this, it comes out from a lower place, from the lower unification, it comes out as a seed. Is this all making sense to you guys?
Yep.
And that's called Tipas Abba. That's called the drop of the Abba. Al derech mashal hishavus atipa b'moach. Just like we said before, that a drop sort of forms in the brain when the person's going to, start making babies. Shafa pishu b'hagshama mi'od. Even though it's more physical and less spiritual, which on the outset seems like it's a lower thing, but on the contrary, the lower thing contains the essence, and it really comes from an essential place higher than the higher unification. So the lower unification is actually ultimately sourced higher than the higher unification. So it is with Hashem. This drop that comes out of God, right? So it's not just kissing and love making for a human, right? Hashem is going through this whole process. When Hashem decides to, so to speak, like make love, right? There's something that's triggered from his essential place, which is the source of Chochmat Atzilus, the panemius, which then enables him to, so to speak, reproduce something which is like him. The son looks like the father, right? It has all the powers of the father, just like the father has a brain and all of his kochos. He can produce something from himself, which is his essence, a seed, and he gives all those same qualities to the son. Shehul b'chinas atzmius hamatzil, right? So we are compared to the essence of the Creator. V'zeu Adam, and that's why we're called Adam, which actually means Adameh le'elyon. Adam has the word like dome in it. Right, so the word for man actually means to be compared to something. It's actually amazing little chap there. Why? What does the word Adam mean? Everything in Hebrew has all kinds of hidden meanings based on, a name of something is actually a combination of letters which usually means something else already. And the word Adam, it comes from the word domeh, which means the very concept of being a man is that you're compared to something. What are we compared to? We're compared to God, because his essence had to be drawn out in order to reproduce us. And that's why it says, B'tzalmeinu kitmusenu. We were created in his image. What does that even mean? Right? It's a very, Hashem didn't have an image. Right? So whatever the essence of Hashem is, he put that into us. And so we are, so to speak, an image of him. The angels in the Shama, but that does not go for the angels. They don't have that same quality. It only goes for the souls. Which again, we are sourced in an entirely different place from the essence of the Koach HaMaskil, as opposed to the, so to speak, mere revelation from the Koach HaMaskil. And that's why we actually say, Ki ata avinu, right? The pasuk says, you are our father. We call Hashem our father, as is known elsewhere, V'dai l'mevi, and that should be sufficient for the wise. Next paragraph. V'zeu gam kein shoresh inyan Rosh Hashanah. Finally, we're bringing it all back home. We haven't spoken about Rosh Hashanah once yet. And here we go. This is the source of what we call Rosh Hashanah. Shubachin is binyan hanukva. Right? So first of all, it should be known that the entire concept of the days of Rosh Hashanah till Yom Kippur is what we call the building of the feminine What does Nukva represent in Spheros? Anybody? Malchus. So we're called. It's called building Malchus. 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur refers to the 10 Spheros of Malchus, right? That each one of those days is like another element of Malchus coming out. Why does Malchus have to be built? What's really going on? And this is why we also change all of our prayers to constantly mention the king, HaMelech HaMishpat, HaMelech HaKadosh, right? That we suddenly start mentioning Hashem's quality of kingship in these days. There's all these inserts in the Siddur. It's because we're performing this rite of building Malchus with Hashem. What does it mean, though? It's like a catchphrase that you'll see in all the Maimarim. We're building Malchus, building Nukva. Here he gets into it in a way that makes it a little bit more understandable what that actually is. So we'll get to it. He says, "V'yesh b'zeh beis inyanim." What does it mean to build Nukva on Rosh Hashanah? There's two inyanim. Aleph, bishvil hashpa le'olam debiyah. One is you're building Malchus in order to give over Shefa to the world. In other words, to create the world. Rosh Hashanah, we know, is when the world was created and has to be continuously created. So one level of what it means to build Malchus, and let's just say, let's fill in the details so we don't just keep repeating ourselves. Malchus, let's say, is the mouthpiece of Hashem, the place that the worlds, are spoken out into being from. So building Malchus is basically building Hashem's speech in this capacity. and therefore we have to help Hashem speak the worlds into existence. That's one of the aspects of Rosh Hashanah, that we're like basically flowing Shefa into the worlds of Bria, Tzir, and Asiyah. And what this entails is drawing new mochin and new ideas. In other words, for Hashem to basically meditate, right? New ideas means he's generating intellectual, like his seichel. And then what does the seichel then do? It gets drawn down and produces emotions, which is the 7 spheros, or the 6 spheros, right? From the mind of the Father. In other words, mean to say, it's kind of like what we were saying before about creating angels, right? What is angels? Angels is nothing other than the world, right? It's just like the messengers, which are the energy bearers, which ultimately wind up being creation itself. And what he's saying is that we have to stimulate this process of like the kiss, what we were saying before, that Hashem has to be like, draw something out of the Koach HaMaskal, which is like an idea, right? And then that idea will breathe life into the angels, which becomes the world. So this is one of the concepts of building a Malchus. That base, Bishvil told us in the Shamas. The other one is that he wants to give birth not to a world, but to souls, right? That the souls are like renewed. New Jews will be made, and even the Jews that are already made, they have to be continuously recreated like everything else. So he has to generate a level of of soul, which we already just spoke about before, that comes from his essence.
Question. I thought that the Mamshech of the Neshamas comes from the Zeren Piri Nukfa. So you're saying that, and some about like how the Neshamas have to do with like Zeren and like coming from the Pnimis and the Mech and the Abba.
Right.
But you're saying like this is the real angels?
No, let me explain. He's saying over there that, well, first of all, everything at some point has to come through Zoom in order to come out of Malchus, right? But like, for example, when you have an, let's say for example, when you have an idea, it also has to, and you're going to express that idea, even though you're not having any babies at the moment, you're still going through Zoom, you're still going through Zah Nukva, because your idea will produce emotions, your emotions will produce speech, right? So you're still basically, the only difference is you haven't reproduced your essence. You've revealed some light from your essence, like the fluffy part of the fruit, right? The juicy part of the fruit, but you haven't necessarily ejected, essence material from yourself. But it still goes through Zoom. It's just that the origin of it comes out right away. It's like it starts off as an intellectual process. So the actual essence of the Koach HaMaskil, it already sort of hatches when it gets to the mind. Meaning to say that that's the primary place that the revelation comes out, and then from mind, if you contract mind, you'll make emotions from mind. So that's the like accessing of Zoom in that process. What we're saying that the souls come from Zun, right? They come from a lower yichud. Is that when the koach hamaskil comes out, it doesn't come out as an intellect. It goes past the mind. There's no intellectual process, which means that like light doesn't come out because it's giving over its essence. The first presence of it is that it only comes out through Zun, right? It's like that's what he's talking about. It's like a lower. But at the end of the day, to get any hashpah to come out, it has to go through all the spheres. The question is, where is the origin generated from?
From the kiss.
What's that? From the first part.
From the first kiss, you get to become in love, and then eventually you take the responsibility and the risk to actually create another you.
Right. That's why, for example, that's what Hashem did also, right?
Yeah.
He created the world before he created man. He created the angels before he created the souls.
For sure.
And that's what we're saying now. The second level is the making of souls, which is basically the creation of Adam Harishon. And that was why we have this idea of the 25th of El, the world was created, and the first of Tishrei, the sixth day of creation. Right after he was kissing for a while, right? He made his then his soul came out, right? He made Adam Harishon on Rosh Hashanah. So. Again, but to your point, you have a very, very good question. I had to figure that out myself when I was reading it, right? But do you understand what the answer?
Yeah.
Okay, it's sort of like just where still both processes are still coming from the mind. But when the mind sort of like is taking it easy, I mean, it's not like gearing up to reveal its essence. It already shows itself sooner, right? And then when it's coming to reveal its essence, it's still coming from the mind. It's the deeper part of the mind, but the way that it actually shows itself is from a lower place, from like a Gashmias place.
Mom was just like the much of the Koach Alaska.
Yeah, so there's two things that come out of the Koach HaMaskil, ideas and essence. Okay, so then we have creation and Adam Harishon, which is basically those same two things, right? We're angels and souls. And that's the idea of the 25th of Elul, which the beginning of the world was created, and then the sixth day of creation in Rosh Hashanah. So that's really what we're saying. Right? When we say this is the day of the beginning of your works, Zichron Liyom Rishon, right? There's a pasuk that says this is the day of the beginning of your works, and it refers to Rosh Hashanah. And the question is always asked in Maimarim, why should that refer to Rosh Hashanah? That's not the beginning of your works. You created the world 5 days earlier, or 6 days earlier. You're aware of this? The world was created on the 25th of Elul. So why do we say this is the day of the beginning of your works? It wasn't. Because it's referring to Adam Harishon, right? And now we see that's a completely different work. Like, in other words, the work he was doing before was a different work. Completely. It was just kissing, right? Now we've got to do the real work. And that's why I said this is the yom of the day of the beginning of your works, because the first time you actually like bore your essence to come out was actually on Rosh Hashanah. And not only that, but once we realized that man was now can be called the beginning of your works, we realized what all that kissing was really there for, right? That therefore we can even say that the 25th of Elul was really the beginning of your works, because it was all for the creation of Adam Harishon. Shebishvilo nivra olam. For him, the world was created, right? So therefore, even though the world was created 5 days or 6 days earlier, it's still relevant to say on Rosh Hashanah that's the beginning. First of all, it was the beginning of a new process, right? And when it comes to push comes to shove, that process was the reason for the other process. So that really was the beginning. If it wasn't for the Rosh Hashanah, he would have made the other days, and therefore it wasn't truly the beginning.
I just
Yeah.
In that sense, could you actually say Adam is literally like the son of God?
Yeah.
Because like
Adam Elyon, that's what we say, yeah.
And then every single, Adam, Noah, Moshe, they each have like a kid, and they each like they're each like falling in love first, and that's like a psychological development, and then they're having their physical development where they really like have there's a risk because there's like potential, the kid could either honor his father or like desecrate him. So it's like or like you can eat the apple and then you're sure to have a good experience, or you can take the risk of taking the seed and putting it in the soil, and you could have something way better, or you could have like a little bush that never does any fruit. So it's like it's like a.
But isn't this also connected with so many other conversations in our life? Because basically, it's the difference also between you and I were actually dipping around with this conversation outside. So I can't help but to put all the dots together. It's like there's two different levels of avoda, right? One is the avoda of like tam vadas, understanding things, and getting excited about ideas and so forth. And the other is the vote of a Kabbalah soul, right? Just like putting the yoke on and doing things even though you don't understand it, right? And in fact, it's the same thing. It's like planting a seed. Like you don't get anything out of planting a seed. On the contrary, all you get is like dirty and sweaty and like annoyed, right? But ultimately, from that lower form of service, it sprouts an infinitely greater level of service.
But you would only plant the seed if you knew what the outcome could be.
It's like you kiss before you make love, basically.
you making love would be eating the apple, right? Sorry, kissing would be eating the apple.
Right.
Yeah. But then planting the seed, the only reason you plant the seed is because you know there's a potential to get something way better.
Right. Yeah, to have Kabbalah soul. Yeah, you have to put the yoke on. But at the end of the day, you're
more vulnerable. You're more responsible.
That's right.
Just like Hashem is responsible and vulnerable for us.
Right.
Because he has a kid now, so it's a way more.
But at the end of the day, you can't ever really know the reason why you're going to have Kabbalah soul. It's like because the whole concept of Kabbalah soul is that it requires doing something that's irrational. You can build yourself up to it and like get ready to jump off the diving board. But when you actually jump off the diving board, no matter how much like you thought that this is a good idea, in the actual jump, it's nothing like those thoughts. It's a complete surrender of your intelligence to a certain. So you can gear yourself up to saying like, okay, I think this makes sense. Okay. I think this makes sense. But it's not going to make sense when you're doing it because it's a senseless thing. It's no longer a kiss. It's just a seed, which is dark and hard. It has no tom, no taste.
Okay.
Anyways, we're just verbringing at this point. So anyway, this is the first day of creation, right? So it says this is really Adam Arishon not the first day of creation, but it's considered the beginning of creation, even though it was the birth of the soul. Now, getting to the real point here. David, hang in there with us, man. You can do it. There's a chair, everything you need. Inyan Tekiyas Shofar. What is the blowing of the shofar? Finally, we mentioned Rosh Hashanah. We're going to also mention now understanding the shofar. Hu al bechinas hamshachas panimius amochin da'aba b'mikor dekula. There you go. We needed this to understand that when you're blowing the shofar, what you're really doing, right, when you blow the shofar on the sixth day of creation, the day Adam Harishon was created, which means he's being created again. You're building Malchus, which means you're going to have Hashem recreate the original experience where he had to bring forth his essence to blow the soul into man. That's a hard trick. How do you sort of like summon that? That's what the shofar does. It draws down the panimius mochin da'aba mekor dekula. Basically, it reaches up into the essence of the koach hamaskil, and it's that shofar which makes that come out. So the shofar is shloshim bechinas panimius atik yomim, and he brings here, because the shofar, it's sourced in what's called the inner dimension of atik yomi, which is already like, right, atik and arich are the two parts of keser, right? You're familiar with this language?
Keser, yeah.
Keser is the sphere above chokhmah, which we were saying basically is the koach hamaskil, right? And the idea is that in the keser itself, now we can understand a little bit more detail. There's two parts. We said there's two parts of the koach hamaskil. One that creates, angels, and one that creates souls, right? One that reveals itself, but one that reveals the essence. And that's really the idea of like arich and anpin, the two parts of keser. When a revelation comes out from the lower part of keser, it merely creates angels. When it comes out from the panimius of atik yomi, then it's reproducing itself. And we're saying the shofar has this root up inside the panimius of atik yomi. Something about this mechanism triggers the essence of the keser to come down. Shemer panimius abba, and then the inner dimension of keser comes out, which then comes down into the inner dimension of abba, which is chokhmah. So the idea is that once the inner one is triggered, it's triggered in such a way that it finds the inner part of chokhmah, right? In other words, chokhmah itself has the inner and outer, right? And if you draw from the outer part of keser, then that only allows the outer part of chokhmah to express itself into bina. I feel like this requires a little bit more explanation.
It makes sense what you're saying.
Yeah?
No, it makes lots of sense.
Okay, good. So the idea being, you spoke before about the idea that there's like an automatic need to lower your level when you go down and express yourself, right? Like if you're going to speak, for example, you're already taking the pure thought and you have to like limit it in order for the other person to come and understand. If you're going to have an idea and it's going to create an emotion inside of you, then the emotion is already like lowering the pure quality of the intellect. Emotions are general on a lower level of intellect, and that's what we call the Seder Ishtalshlus. Basically, the lower part of the higher one, right, comes into the higher part of the lower one. And by the time the lower one wants to give over, it's already the lower part of the lower one, and so you keep losing quality as you go down the line, right? But that's only when you go down the line in a way of chitzonius, in a way of hishtalshelus. But Hashem can do anything, and if Hashem wants to pull the highest part, and He wants to basically send it straight down the line without losing any quality, this is, for example, what we call the difference between the Asara Maimaros and the Aseres Adibros. I'm going off a little bit on tangent here, but it's you'll get it. There's 10 statements of creation and there's 10 statements of Torah, right? And it's like when Hashem spoke, first of all, He spoke in two different ways. He spoke at two different times. First thing He spoke the world into being. It's the exact same conversation we're having, just I'm switching the gears a little bit. From creation to souls, right? Kissing to making love. So basically, when Hashem spoke the world, He spoke 10 statements, but they were 10 statements from the external reality, right? And that's why they created a world, which is something which is already, a step in a process of losing its original quality from where it came from, right? Because the world is not a clear and obvious representation of Hashem. It's like a step down. That's why the word world actually comes to the word olam, which means helam, which means concealment. The very notion that there's a world means Hashem has already dropped the quality of godliness in order to get it to come down this low. And like we said, like the chain, like descent, it keeps losing something as it goes down. But the 10 statements of Torah, which are called the Aseres Hadibros, right? That's when Hashem spoke, like the world stopped. In fact, it says the bird didn't even chirp, and all the heavens were open. We saw mamish like the essence of Hashem. And when he spoke, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, He said Anochi. It refers to Ana Navshi Kasavis Yahavis, which means I wrote my soul down, neshamas, and gave it to you. So inside of the giving of Torah, even though it came down into words and it did descend into a lower world, it did not lose its panemius quality. It stayed in the realm of the same qualitative level as it was on the top. So it kind of breaks the rules of nature from the very outset. Because normally, if you want to go from high to low, you lose quality after quality after quality. That's the concept. You go from mind to heart to thought to speech to action. It goes down. Hashem has a way from going from panemius to panemius. That when you trigger the inner dimension, then that sort of finds a way into the lower sphero's inner dimension, and the lower sphere beyond that, its inner dimension. So when you go through the inner dimension, even though it does go down the pike, it doesn't lose its essential quality. And that's when Torah came out. It's like God revealed Himself. That's not an expression of the world. It's an expression of the essence, right? And even though it came down into a world, so it did kind of, but it's exactly like the seed. The seed is the essence of the koach hamaskil. It does come down, right? Even when it comes into the seed, it's not in any way, shape, or form the same looking like the actual essence of the koach hamaskil. It comes down into like a physical form, but inside that physical form, Hashem figured out a way to transfer essence all the way down without losing quality. And that's what we're saying here, that the panemius of Atik Yomin, which is the highest part of Kesser, goes into the panemius of Abba. It finds a way to go down, but stay refined, and that's why it hits the inner dimension of the Chokhmah, which will hit the inner dimension of Bina. All the way, as it's going down, it's staying connected with the inner dimension, which is not losing its essential quality.
But then it's just like a human. The human is the same thing, right? Where on the outwards appearance, it's at a very low dimension, but in the inner dimensions, it's God. So
Yeah.
This is something about this, right?
We basically get that. That's why we have the Torah, right? Because your soul comes down to an animal soul, which then has physical desires and even evil desires, right? So part of coming down to this world was that we kept lowering our quality. But when you have the Torah, externally, but when you have, and what brings out the internal? Torah. So when you all of a sudden like put Torah thoughts, speech, action, right? Meditation, emotions. So that is the kli which is able to summon your panemius, your inner dimension, to express itself, even though you're still in a physical world. If you leave the Torah behind, you lose attachment to the. Even though you have a panemius, it doesn't have a way of expressing itself in a panemius way. So it gets lost, and what's the only thing that expresses itself is your external, which is your animalistic self. A Jew without Torah is an exile, because his panemius, his true self, does not have the medium with which to come out, because those letter combinations of Torah is how the panemius comes out down here. If you take away the letter combinations of Torah, what you're left is the letter combinations of creation, and that hides Hashem, right?
Trippy.
It is trippy. We are on a trip. Okay, so this is Hamshachas Mochin da Abba Lazun, and then once it goes from the panemius of Keser, it goes to the panemius of Chochmah, then it comes down to Zun. Bishvil told us Adam Rishon, right? You got that now, that seed from the man, which is going to give birth to Adam Rishon. So so Imamish is the son of God. It's an unbelievable thing, right? Hashem literally made himself into like a human, right? It's hard to say it, but it seems that's what he's saying here. Shubachin is Toldos HaNeshama, right? This is called the birth of the Neshama. Whom bechinas panemius va'atmos amochin, it comes from the very essence of Hashem's mind. Shu bechinas tipas abba, which is the drop of the Father. Shemoli bedomala, which gives birth to something which is a reproduction of himself. And that's why it says v'yivra Hashem Elokim es ha'adam b'tzalmo. And again, we have another pasuk. Hashem created man in His own image.
The Torah is kind of like the Ketubah.
Yeah.
So you get to remember He's your Father. And
right. Yeah. Torah is different. Ketubah has it, but because of the marriage.
Yeah.
Right, I'm with you there. Okay. So what's that?
The idea about panemius coming from the Atik Yemen.
Yeah.
Can you like re-say that?
What we're basically saying is when you trigger the panemius, it keeps going down in a panemius way. When you're going from the chitzonius, it keeps going down in a chitzonius way. What's the difference between them, right? Is that the chitzonius, when it goes down, it's basically what happens is the higher sphere, which is coming to go into the lower sphere, right? Only the external part actually comes out and enters the lower place. For example, thought and speech, just as an example, right? When you're actually or actually, let's take it a little higher up, intellect and emotion, right? When you're going to have like an intellectual experience, which is then going to drip in and bear an emotion, there is still some intellect in your emotion. Because if you wasn't living on some intellectual experience, the emotion would fall away. It was yesterday's Tanya, in fact, right? If you don't have like some kind of a das, he calls it over there das tachton, which is like some kind of an opinion, which is a remnant of your intellectual idea. It's called hesech hadas. You'll remove your das and you'll just forget about your emotion. You'll have to be emotional about something else. If you want your emotion to sort of maintain its existence, it has to have some intellect sort of enlivening it all the time, right? But that intellect which is enlivening it is the external part of the intellect that you actually had to begin with, which creates the emotion. Because the whole intellect does not go into the heart in order to maintain that emotion. Only the lowest aspect of the intellect, the higher part of the intellect, remains in the brain. It doesn't contract itself enough to basically go down and be in the heart, right? It just gives a ray of that intellect, which is called the chitzonius, and that ray is enough to now basically power that emotion. Now what happens next? The emotion is now going to go into the thought, right? Which then lead into the speech. So the emotion also, not the entirety of the emotion goes into the thought. Only a ray from the emotion goes into the thought. So what you have is a ray of a ray of a ray of a ray of a ray, and that's called the external transmission. Panemius transmission works in a different way. You're going to give the actual thing, and you're going to put it down there. You're not going to take a piece of it or a ray of it. You're going to take its essence. Oh, how are you going to fit the whole brain into the heart? Let's put it into a seed. Right? That's why the contraction has to be more. Because you're transferring the essence, you have to put it into a zip drive, right? You can't like let it shine, which anyway, the shine would just be a ray. But even the ray, as we know, it's like it's like revelation. It's like the fruit of, it's like the juice of the fruit, juicy part of the fruit. It sort of shows itself. So it's not containing the essence. So if you want panemius to come down, it's possible, but you have to sort of wrap it up inside of a box. And that's what Torah is. Torah is like in everything in existence, but inside of 600,000 little letters, right? Because it's like packed in. So that's the way Hashem figured out to make it so that the whole brain could actually come down, not just a ray of it. But the trade-off is it comes down in a way that you can't see it at all. It's like a putrid drop. Right? But in that putrid drop at the end of the line, when it comes all the way down, it can make a whole new brain, right? Because it has the essence in it. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I see what you're saying about it being senseless, because as it goes down and down and down, it makes less and less sense because it's not in the mind.
That's right.
And then when you actually go to the lowest point, then it all makes sense. Because that's the sense of creation, is so that there's a revelation, so that
it brings out like the ultimate pleasure.
Exactly.
You know,
The
sense, for example, is good because you feel some like light and revelation from it. Senselessness, no, but when it actually comes out and gets the job done, it's most revelation, most feeling of pleasure.
But to get to that ultimate sense, you need to sort of abandon.
That's exactly right. Nice of an ishma, right? It's like that. We only receive the Torah because we will do before we understand, and it's the secret of the Jews until today. Like, why we last so long? Because we don't have to rely on it making sense. We have we have a power inside of us called Amunah. We're going to soon learn Hamanas Elokus, which is a special mimer which describes the mitzvah of believing in God. And the takeaway from that whole thing is that we have this unique power called faith. Not everybody has it. It's like a Jewish thing. And just like you can use your mind to sort of access the understanding of God, we have this thing called faith, which we can access as a power, and it's just we give ourselves over to God without any reason whatsoever. We have a quality that enables us to do that. It's what makes you a Jew. We're believers, and so you could just like activate your power of faith. Anyone can do it. Any Jew can do this, right? And all of a sudden you just access a completely different level of Hashem that's only accessible by faith. Right, and that is this ultimately the essence of Hashem, right? Because it's by definition you can't use your mind for it. You can't understand it. It's a different koach that you have. Just like you have a power of love and power of fear, power of mind. You have a power of faith, and to wield that is basically comes out as Kabbalah soul. Like, all right, I'm just going to do this. It doesn't make any sense to me. Why would we do that? We're like a whole people that just makes no sense, and yet we're indestructible because of that power of faith.
And that power of faith essentially is procreation. It's like it's
yeah.
And most of my friends who have no faith, I don't want to have a kid. I don't have faith in the world.
That's true. It's true. Yeah, because you have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah, but that's the point.
It's also parenthood and everything else. All right, we ran out of time today, my friends, but we'll pick it up tomorrow.
Amazing.
The source of the nimshaching of the Chitzonius comes from the lower level of Chesed?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So beautiful. Wow. Alright, is it like Kabbalah? I don't know if I'm like, this is like a little bit inappropriate, but is it like Kabbalistic Kabbalahs for like when you're having relations?
You should have no.
No, there are, because you have to also have Amunah. Like, you know, accessing your power of faith does not negate you simultaneously acting your power of reason. There are two powers, so you can simultaneously have. For example,
if you have reason, it's not faith.
If you have reason that's blocking your faith, or if your faith is dependent on your reason, then you're right. But for example, let me give you an example. A Talmud Chacham who's sitting and learning Torah a whole day, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, he doesn't eat, he doesn't drink, he doesn't even have a cup of coffee or a cigarette break. He's putting himself like a yoke, like an animal to the yoke, and yet what's he doing the whole time? Thinking and understanding. You can use those two powers simultaneously, because he's not going to say, I'm going to only sit and learn with Kabbalah soul if I understand it. He's not doing that. He's going to sit and learn whether he understands it or not. But one of the things he's going to do with his Kabbalah soul is use his brain. So you can. So there are kavanas even when you're doing that, because it's not that you're basing it on the kavanas. It's that you Hashem wants us to use all of us. So just like you're going to put on the yoke and dig with a shovel and put on mitzvahs and run around doing bikur cholim and visiting the sick, which is like clearly like a schlep. Using your brain is also a schlep in that level. You're serving Hashem with your brain, which means you're busy understanding the whole time, but it's not overshadowing your faith. It's just like your hands are an expression of your faith, your brain is an expression of your faith. You see what I'm saying there?
For sure, but it's an expression. It's not
Right.
a source.
That's right. That's right.
And so it's just like I think actually every single commandment we do,
Yeah.
you can add an explanation for it.
Right.
But fundamentally, it's senseless.
That's right. That's right.
Okay,
That's
okay.
right. Yeah.
It's just like having a kid. You could think all these reasons for
Right.
it, but fundamentally,
Right.
it makes no sense.
Yeah. That's why it's not nisa. It's nisa v'nishma, which means we'll do in the moment, but the nishma comes after the nisa. Right? So you need both to do and to understand, but if you must have your doing before your understanding, because the understanding, as you said, is just an expression that comes afterwards. That's why Jews are also geniuses, though. Because when you use your brain in this way, you're not using your brain for yourself. You're commanded to use your brain to the fullest, right? So we've expanded it, but it's not because we're so brainy and we're like using, you know what I mean? It's a mitzvah to use the brain. Okay. Yeah.
Good Shabbos.
Thanks, brother. You too. Good Shabbos.
When